Hi, I'm Carl Taylor from visualeducation.com. In this episode, we're going to look at these pasta still life images, the behind the scenes, and how they were created. So, I really love this image. This was a favorite of mine that I shot as a still life image. Wanted to choose some things that were easily accessible for most people, easy to set up, just took a little care in, how you're going to style it, how you're going to arrange it. And I created this particular layout on several different layers with all these strands of tagliatelle, spaghetti, different shaped pasta shells. And then I set about carefully lighting them to create a little sense of mystery and mood in the shot. Very, very happy with that particular result. We're going to take a look at how that was done. But I also did another one. I mean, often with still life projects, you aim to maybe do more than one still life or do variations on a theme. And here's another one of the variations. This one's got a completely different look to the lighting and different feeling and different style, different arrangement, more random. And the lighting on this one might look a little bit more unusual. And the reason is that on this one, I'm using a technique called light painting. And that's where I'm basically using multiple bursts of light in one exposure to light the subject. So we're going to talk about that and how that was achieved for this particular shoot. So let's move back to the first one and just take another look at that. I want you to take a look, please, at the shadows and the highlights. So have a look at the density of the shadows. They're not too dark. They're a little bit darker to make them just a little bit more ominous and not super, super light and airy. The highlights on the pasta shells look very much like sort of dappled sunlight or low-level early morning or late evening light, that low-level long-angle shadow. And one of the reasons for using that low-level light is, of course, it's great at revealing texture. So that helps me reveal the texture of the pasta and create all these sort of bands, if you like, of highlights and shadows, highlights and shadows. And then, of course, these sort of longer shadows that are being cast by each particular layer in the shot. I suppose the predominant or more time-consuming part of the shot is actually just the arrangement. So I spent a considerable amount of time positioning the strands of pasta on blocks at one level and then another layer on another set of blocks at a different height, etc., and experimenting with different arrangements and then finding positions to put individual pasta shells or pasta pieces until I arrived at an arrangement that I really liked. So let's move on to look at the lighting for that one in the behind the scenes on pasta shot number 2. So first of all, we're going to look at the scene. There's the camera looking straight down on the pasta shells here. This white panel is a reflector board, just being used as a reflector. These items here are flags. And what a flag is a piece of black card or black fabric that blocks some of your main lighting, your key lighting, and creates a shadow in a certain area or reduces the intensity of the lighting in the foreground a little bit or the area that's closest to the light source. Now, the main light is coming from kind of where we're looking at this picture. I'm just about to put a P70 reflector that's in my hand there. I'm just about to put that over the light source and put that grid so that I create a narrow beam of light. Because at the moment, I think I've just got the bare bulb and I'm just about to change that over. And the flags are there to block some of that beam of light where I don't want it to hit or to reduce it. That's the key light. That's the main light that's creating those shadows. And then here is one other light. That light there is shining up and bouncing into a white ceiling to put a global illumination fill into the shadows. And then I can control how dark I want the shadows completely independently, because the shadow density can be changed by increasing the bounced illumination off the ceiling or decreasing it. And it won't affect the shape of the shadows or the sharpness of the shadows, because they're created by the key light source that is shining on the pasta. It's only how dark the shadows will be that is affected by the global illumination. And I often work in that way by using global illumination to fill the light into the shadows in a very controlled manner. Let's move to behind the scenes shot number 2. Here you can see the light source now with the P70 reflector on it, shining directly at the pasta, which is on the table in layers on those blocks, as I explained. And here is a piece of black card sticking into shot there, and here is another one sticking into shot here. They're held on those flexible Manfrotto bendy arms, so I can move them around where I want them. And they're just designed to cast a bit of shadow on parts of the image that were too bright, or where I didn't want the light to hit quite as directly. Over here, you can't see the light, but on that stand is the light that's shining up at the ceiling to give me global illumination into those shadows. And here's that reflector panel to bounce some light back into the shadow side as well. And if we revert back to the photograph and study that a little bit more, we can kind of figure out what's doing what. So our key light is shining in, and you can see the brightest part of it is hitting this sort of dicky bow tie shaped piece of pasta. It's also hitting this one here, but it doesn't look quite as strong. And that's because one of my flags is partially blocking the light. So that's just reducing the intensity of light in that area alone. And then over here, I had another flag, and that one was reducing the intensity of the light hitting this part of the pasta and this part, so that I didn't end up with the top of the pasta shot, the top of the shot being the brightest part that was illuminated. Because remember, what's closest to the light source is going to be the brightest illumination. So in this instance, I'm trying to hold the viewer into the center of the shot. I don't want them looking at the top edge of the shot and the brightest, highest contrast points. So I'm using flags to stop that from happening and reducing that. And that means that my highest contrast points, my key points of lighting, end up still in the middle of the photograph. If you look at it, you'll see it's this pasta shell, a little bit on this one, and a little bit on that one. And the key area of lighting is all in the center, keeping the viewer locked into that area. The low angle of the main P70 light is a grazing light, creating these nice long shadows and that early morning sunlight or late evening low sunlight feeling to it. And then the darkness of these shadows here, here, here is controlled by that global illumination fill that is bouncing off of the ceiling of my studio and completely controlled independently in power as necessary. Okay, let's move on to the next pasta shot, which is this one. Let's just take another look at that. Now, this one feels a little bit more mysterious, romantic. I don't know how you would describe it, but there's a sense of something being a little bit strange. Some of the shadows are sharper, some of them are soft. It feels like the light is sort of dancing around a little bit in there. And of course, the arrangement in this one is very much more sort of naturally chaotic, less uniform and rigid. It's more just like the stuff's been thrown on the table. Obviously it hasn't. I've spent a bit of time arranging it and positioning things, but it's giving it that more random, chaotic composition rather than the rigid one before. But the lighting has changed as well, and the base surface that we're shooting on here is a bit of timber, plywood timber, whereas the other one was matte black acrylic. But the lighting here is interesting. It's kind of a little bit more magical, a little bit more strange. And this was achieved by using little bursts of pockets of light, one after the other, onto the subject in a very controlled manner. Little blip of light here, blip of light there, blip of light there, all done during one long exposure of, say, about 30 seconds in a darkened studio, so that we can basically capture all those blips of light in one shot, and then the resulting exposure is as you see it there. So how is that done? Let's take a look at the behind the scenes on that. Let's move into behind the scene one. So first of all, I'm using a speed light for this shot. You can see the speed light here. And I've made a homemade snoot. A snoot is just something that wraps around the light, usually conical in fashion or tubular, that reduces the size of the hole that the light can escape from. Now, some snoots, you can put grids in the end of them to reduce the area or the escape angle of the light even more. Sometimes it doesn't need it. Some snoots have a very small opening, as does this one, and some have a larger opening. You can make a snoot as you like. You just make them out of cardboard rolled up in a bit of sticky tape to secure it. In this case, I used a very conical snoot with a very small opening, slid it over the end of the speed light, and then I'm able to press the button on the speed light, the test button or the fire button, and every time I fire it, a bit of light comes out the end of the snoot, but because the end of the snoot opening is so small, I can direct that light to a very specific patch. And because the snoot is black, it doesn't show up in a long exposure, especially if you keep moving around. So you can pop one bit of flash, another bit of flash, another bit, another bit, another bit, another bit, and the black snoot and the constant moving during the long exposure just means it's recording each little pop of light that you fire during the process. And we can see that very slightly in this shot. It's a little bit hard to see. I'll zoom in a little bit. But there's the speed light in my hand, and there's my thumb on the test button. And here's the end of the snoot, and there's it firing. That's actually when it just got caught firing on one particular burst. Camera directly above, and what I'm doing is I'm firing it multiple times. So it's not just one burst of flash. I say it's a long exposure of maybe about 30 seconds in a darkened studio, and then multiple bursts of flash, maybe 6, maybe 8, maybe a dozen times. You just experiment with it until you get to the result that you want. And the result that I ended up with, that I was very happy with, was this particular final shot here. May have consisted of 5 or 6 bursts of little pockets of flash. The way you determine how much flash power you need is just by testing. So you could set your flash power to 1/16 or 132, 1/64, whatever. Do a test shot for one burst and see how bright the exposure is. Remember, if you fire in the same spot twice, you're adding double the amount of light, so it's like a one-stop increase. So you want to try avoiding hitting the same spot over and over again, and keep the little points and pockets of light moving around into slightly different positions. And you can remember, if you angle the light slightly more or come from above or a bit further away, it's going to change the exposure slightly. You can use that to your advantage. But it's a real fun way of experimenting with this light painting technique. So easy to do because you can just do it with a speed light and a homemade snoot. And you can get these wonderful effects for any type of still life. Works particularly well light painting on food photography, but any still life you can play around with this light painting technique. Well, those particular examples are available on visualeducation.com, the full videos and behind the scenes and the full walkthrough on everything that was used to create them and the settings, etc. So if you'd like to see those, head over to visualeducation.com. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm Carl Taylor. Thanks very much for watching.